Hi, everyone. This is Jackie Cooper, and I'm here today for the GBA talk show. And I want to welcome everyone back to this episode and thank everyone for liking and subscribing. Definitely, you want to stay connected because we have a lot of great people who are coming on the show, and we're going to be dropping that information soon. So everyone who's here, if you haven't been on the past few shows, I'm going to share a little bit about my background so you know a little bit more. I actually have another talk show also called Crypto Mom 2. My background is that I'm an attorney, but I'm also a special educator, and I navigated into the blockchain area about 4 years ago, and I love the creativity that I have seen on the chain. Everyone is thinking about different solutions to the problems that exist in our world today, and everyone is also very supportive and helpful. And to me, that has been wonderful because as a teacher and as a parent, I know that that's what we do. We guide, we direct, and we support. So today, our conversation is going to be very informative. I know I was offline with Michael before. We were talking about energy and decentralization and a lot of solutions that are coming forward and that already exist. So I was learning a lot prior, and I said, let's get on the recording so we can share with everyone. So Michael, welcome today. Thank you so much for being on. How are you doing?
Life is good, really good.
So I'm going to have you introduce yourself because you have such a diverse background. I don't want to miss anything. And what you're doing is really phenomenal. And I also am going to let you share your screen when you think it's appropriate. And we're going to navigate through the various tools and resources that you and others have created to make our life better. So I'm going to let you go ahead and share more about yourself and how you got started in the blockchain.
Wonderful. Well, thank you again for hosting this and for allowing folks like myself to be able to have a voice, as most of the time, at least in my world, we're focused on building tools and technologies, primarily just because we see a problem. And let me kind of give you a baseline. If I work with a couple companies that focused on decentralization, they're all clear different companies. And we've been working on this for well over a decade. So starting in 2009, so for the last 13 years, we've been focusing on decentralized systems and technology. But we've done that because for the prior 13 years, so 26 years total, we have basically worked on centralized systems. So it's 13 years in centralized and now almost 13 years in decentralized. And we really believe that innovation and technology has a lot of solutions for humanity in general, if it's built in such a way where technology can actually execute certain things without the human in the middle of it per se. But you do it in such a way where there's a surety. And like what you're focused on and GBA is focused on, GBA talks about blockchain, Crypto Mom talks about crypto, or in short, crypto really stands for cryptography, which really is just math. It's just math. So how can technology actually execute certain math or physics or solutions to be able to provide value and benefit to humanity in general? And so these different companies are focused on different solutions around decentralization, but really, and when I say decentralization, it encompasses everything around cryptography, but it really is around removing the centralized ecosystem of systems that we're already used to. You come from the legal profession. You understand legal versus law. There's a difference. Most folks don't really see that, but because you've spent a lot of years in the legal system understanding terminology, process, structures, you've joined an association, a bar, whether that bar is a federal or national or a state or a county bar, that's an association. It's like one, and an individual can contract with an association or a business or a community or a company to be able to do certain things. And you've taken a bar assessment, right? And you've connected into this, but it's different than what really the law system talks about. So the law system talks about, for instance, even in the Constitution, it talks about how government is not going to impede an individual or a corporation from entering into private agreement. Now that's separate from the law system, colonialism. Anyway, I don't want to get all about this, but
I love it.
the
I
thing
love it.
centralization is really at the center of a lot of these systems. And we
Yes.
look at it as something even bigger than that. We look at it as a form of really secret combinations. And whether it's in law or tech or media or health or food or pharma, or it ekes into government. And what we've really seen are governments that have been overtaken by pieces of these secret combinations, and they really break into two ecosystems. One that is around private ecosystems, and two that is around public. The public ones are ones that we can see. So let's say Papua New Guinea or Ghana or China or US or Taiwan. These are all countries that have their own physical geography that they're supposedly governing. And in so doing, they create their own currency, they create their own monetary policy, they create their own transactions, but they're really creating a form of what is perceived as value, whether it's backed by something like the Chinese renminbi is backed supposedly by rooms and rooms and rooms full of gold bullion, silver, platinum, uranium. It's literally backed by real precious, what we as humans perceive or think is valuable, right?
Right.
I would say, when was the last time you used gold or silver or platinum? I mean, anyways, but the point is you've got public financial systems that have currencies tied to them. Then you've got private systems that are usually tied to some type of a fund. Like the IMF is a good example. But what is the IMF? What is the United Nations? What are these different ecosystems? And we're starting to see a brand new one come out with 7 or 8 countries. I won't talk specifics since we're in the middle of a war and there's kind of a bunch of other dynamics flowing around that.
Yeah.
But what I'm driving at is behind these things that we all call countries are really secret combinations. And these are affluent ecosystems that have made money over generations, or they've even worked together to make other, like how does the International Monetary Fund work? Well, through project finance. Well, how does the project finance work? And really, when you understand it, everybody actually makes money. So, and I'm not going to be specific, but let's say, well, I'll use one example. Let's say there's an earthquake somewhere, and like we're talking 80% in certain regions are just gone, like they don't exist anymore.
Devastated.
So,
yeah.
Let's say the IMF comes in and they'll actually, believe it or not, they'll use private finance to then issue public assets or debt. Now, when you understand that, that's the same thing that happens in the banking industry. Our 2008 issue was around mortgages tied to those debts. So when people actually say, let's say I have $1 in a bank, I can loan out $10. You're creating that $9 that's actually being loaned out based upon leverages, fraction-based leverage. That doesn't just happen in banks. It happens in the money creation system with these private secret combinations. So my point is all of this stuff is just yucky. It's centralized systems where the individual actually gets hurt.
Yeah.
I mean, really, when things get created, inflation happens because there's more money supply. But does the individual really get that money, or does it eke into something that didn't necessarily have the right value exchange around trade? So when we use technology, and this is why I really love, probably one of the basic reasons why you got into this ecosystem, I love what Bitcoin represents. It represents a store of value, but not because there's something that backs it, but because from a perception standpoint, someone actually grabs a miner, plugs it into a power source and pays the power bill, and then gets that coin and actually perceives it to be valuable because they paid for that miner, which is an asynchronous miner. So it comes up with it's an algorithm that's based upon a fictitious math question that burns energy over time, right? Which is a whole nother topic around energy and blah, blah, blah. But the point that I'm trying to drive at is they paid a power bill to come up with a mathematical question, not to create a transaction, not to create, they can say it creates a block, but ultimately it's just how Bitcoins were given out. But one of the reasons I love Bitcoin is it is a proven litmus test that cryptography works, the math works, the security works. And so with that being said, why can't everyone create their own form of value? Whether it's through a business, I mean, you probably have a trust or a home, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in that home, what kind of law did you practice, Jackie?
It was civil, it was business, it was nonprofit oriented.
Okay. So you're familiar with probably the asset-backed lending stuff. You're probably familiar with wills.
Yep.
So you're probably familiar with probate, what happens when someone passes away, how does it, so let's look at it as we all are our own individual value.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, whether we see ourselves, and one of the reasons I really love what you're doing is you talk about crypto mom too. I believe mothers are one of the most powerful things, and it's not just in humanity, but on this planet, primarily because they create. I don't care if it's a piglet or a monkey or a giraffe, they're creative. And some people say, well, a seahorse doesn't have to have a male and female. But what I'm trying to drive at is through creation.
Yeah.
And the individual actually can be who they are.
Yeah.
And that is what freedom, choice, prosperity, all is based on. And I believe one of the most important things that the Constitution really represents is the individual. And when you look at it from a constitutional standpoint with your lens on it from a legal standpoint, the Constitution is actually there for the individual. It's there so they can actually be free, so that they can prosper, so they can choose. And if one individual contracts with another individual, or one individual creates a business to contract with another, or one individual creates a trust to hold something, those things are constitutionally protected by design. Now, did they have the technology back then in the 1700s? No. Did they have from a cryptography standpoint? But we have it now. And in my opinion, there's two things that actually solve a lot of these problems. And one of them is decentralization. Now, decentralization to me means a ton of stuff all wrapped into one. When GBA, the Global Blockchain Association, talks about blockchain fits into decentralization. When you, as Global Mom 2, talks about Crypto Mom 2, you talk about crypto, you're talking about cryptography, you're talking about math, you're talking about encryption, you're talking about security. All of that fits into decentralization. But really, it's the power of how you can take decentralized systems away from the centralized ecosystem and enable the individual, from identity to transactions to really just the right to be. Like right now, we're seeing a massive amounts of rights, whether it's privacy, whether it's speech, just being decimated. Now, all in the name of security and being safe, which is a different conversation. It's really related, but the way that we do that in the open source, in the technology world, is by living open source, not just software, but standards. And so if you layer decentralization with technology that's open, you can literally combat these centralized ecosystems. As crazy as that may sound, what you'll actually see is the first iteration of how that actually can come to the world, what we call the digital world. For instance, you and I are connecting in a digital format. We're physically not together.
Right.
But what if you were in Japan and I was in China? Or, Taiwan to Greece, or Taipei to Utah. I mean, these are all digital ecosystems. We could have 1,000 people on the same session. We're all connecting digitally, and 1,000 people can even listen to this thing. Mm-hmm. So my point is in the digital world, there can evolve a new type of standard that the individual is actually in the center of. And all we as humans have to do is say, you know what? I agree with that. I can select that. I can live by that. I choose to be a part of that. And by so choosing, for instance, I assume you're in America, yeah?
Yeah, I am.
And you have a passport in America?
Yeah.
And identity probably in your state?
Yep, in Maryland, yeah.
And you're probably registered to vote in your county?
I will be doing that tomorrow, yep.
So we've got a country, we've got a state, and we've got a county.
Yeah.
And really your identity is actually defined by what? The county. Your identity, your land records, your voting records, your marriage records, all of those go to the county, not the state. and not the country. That is a perfect example of the first declaration and first constitution that gives those rights in a decentralized way to the individual in their own area. Your sheriff has more power than a sitting president, whether elected or selected. Literally, the sheriff in your own county knows your circumstances. They know what's going on the streets. They know what's going on, in the homes. They know what's good, what's bad, and hopefully they also care, right? So,
Exactly.
and if they don't, it's easier to hold them accountable than it is to say, hey, people in a whole nother jurisdiction, which is not even the country. When we talk about the District of Columbia, we really understand the Constitution. The jurisdictions don't even match up. They're two separate ecosystems, but we won't get into that. My point is, in the digital world, it traverses these things that we call borders.
Yeah, it does.
They're really imaginary lines. Have you ever gone to Canada and driven through you're just on a road, you just go right. We create these fictitious lines because how humanity actually was sailing around the world, sticking a new flag with a new color. Maybe it took sword, maybe it took a gun to take it, but today's world, the digital world, knows no borders. It is the whole earth that is the jurisdiction. Does that make sense?
Makes total sense. I mean, again, that's one of the reasons why I became interested in the blockchain, is just its global reach and the fact that we can do a lot to help people independent of, like you said, the country and the borders. It is borderless. But again, you have to provide that education to individuals in order for them to be able to benefit from it.
Where you and I initially met back in DC, there was another gal that was there, and I won't be specific. Her name is Amelia. And she actually helped first off, she got elected as a county commissioner. And she understood the technology side, the business side, the use side, and literally she has deployed technology at the government layer in a county to actually do things like a marriage. So imagine over 30,000 marriages being conducted online in the digital world. For instance, let's say someone in Toronto doesn't want to get vaccinated. Did you know that you can't actually get in the province of Ontario, you can't get a marriage license if you don't get vaccinated?
Had no clue, but there are a lot of laws like that in other states that are also, as ridiculous as that.
That's one of the reasons the truck drivers were just like, hey, we're done with this, but that's just one of many. But so instead of them getting married there, they can get a marriage license online, and they can get married online in a jurisdiction that they choose. And that's, Utah County has put like $6 million to $12 million to the bottom line that taxpayers would normally be on the hook for. Now, it's not just about money. This is a proven case around how you've got a digital ability to grab, or at least be somewhere else, virtually or physically or digitally, however you want to call it. But in so doing, you're also traversing different jurisdictional laws. So for instance, in China, the government reached out to Utah County and said, how can you allow two men in China to get married online? We forbid it. We do not. And for me, I don't understand that kind of mentality, but I do love people. I love people for who they are, no matter what their choices are. And I believe that simple love and gift is one it's through the whole world. It's not just through one individual to another. But the point that I'm driving at is, what governs that? And can there be conflict? Can there be resolution? Can there be solutions that are all cryptographically created in a digital ecosystem? So for instance, let's say that someone has a conflict with another person. Can they create a grievance, a claim, a suit, or maybe even a class action suit in a digital ecosystem that uses technology to say, put your claim in, try and resolve your claim, understand what your claim says. Based upon your claim, we analyze it with machine learning and artificial intelligence without a human being involved to say, hey, have you actually done this and this and this because of this and this and this? So it uses a form of technology to actually create alignment before disclosures or suits are even created. And then imagine, and I'm sure you coming from the legal world, it would be refreshing to say, well, what if party A and party B that have conflict, they could say this is public or private record. And they could say that they actually will pay for a mediator. They're not going to go through a judicial system or court system. They're going to go through a mediation process, and that mediator is going to care. That mediator is going to get paid by them, and that mediator is going to have no dog in the fight other than trying to come up with a resolution. And what that mediator says actually sticks. Now, if the A and B says, you know what, that's not right, I don't agree with it, I'm going to appeal it, they can go to a council. So imagine an ecosystem where you basically have different councils. So responsibility, governance, health, legal, economic, business, development, providers, safety, education, finance, technology, infrastructure, consumer service, and communications. Imagine if there's 13 to 15 people on each one of these councils that actually help to create value for all of humanity. And they are self-selected through a process that is normalizing. There is no king, there is no president, there is no ruler. Yes, myself and many others have helped create this ecosystem, but imagine an ecosystem that it's set up and it just runs. So for instance, who created Bitcoin?
Well, we think we know, but we really don't know. We know the name, but we're not quite sure who that name represents. So Satoshi, but again, we're not sure.
So Satoshi, you were at the last GBA event in DC, right?
Yeah.
And did you meet Scott?
I think I did. I met a lot of people. Yeah.
So what if I told you that what we see today as Bitcoin is a combination of a lot of bright people that actually care, but they also know that they would be in jail if they actually were known who they were, primarily because these secret combinations on the other side of it would say, you're a terrorist. You enable this kind of transaction or that type of communication or this type of value exchange. And so on one hand, I would say we know humans created it, right? On the other hand, I would say it doesn't really matter who created it.
Yeah.
But there's a lot more to that, and in time it'll be understood, especially in 2019 was not, when the white paper was created, it was not the first time that a blockchain or encryption was actually used in a transaction like this. As a matter of fact, if you really read the white paper, the individuals that were named in it like 3 or 4 times, one individual named 4 times was Scott, the gentleman that you and I met in DC when we first originally met. Now, but the thing is, that wasn't in 2009, that wasn't the first time that blockchain was actually run. As a matter of fact, October 13th, 1991 was actually the first time that a type of multi-ledger, one single ledger with multiple devices all aligned with a timestamp. Timestamp was actually the first use case. But to make a long story short, it doesn't really matter who created it. What the question is can it actually be killed? Can Bitcoin be killed today?
I would say no.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And so the goal is, how can you set up a system that just doesn't do a value transaction like what Bitcoin does, but it allows people to actually create who they are, prove who they are, identify themselves, document themselves, transact, maybe create an entity, a trust, an organization, a business, a community, a certain type of vehicle. Maybe it's a special type vehicle trust. Maybe it's a special type entity. Maybe it's, and then you can literally, these things become an ecosystem that can actually be what we call tokenized. So you have a cryptographic representation of what they are, and then you can literally hold it in a wallet in real time. So for instance, do you have kids?
I have a daughter who's 26, yes.
Okay. And let's say that you are 46. In 40 more years from now, when you're 86, you're probably going to care. I'm just throwing a fictitious number out there.
I understand. It's all good.
And when you're 86, you're going to start caring about, does my daughter have access to the things that I've worked my life to create?
Yeah.
Maybe it's a home that's paid for. Maybe maybe it's some land, maybe it's a vase, maybe it's a piece of art, but does that actually go to my daughter when I take my last breath?
Mhm.
And today, I don't know, what state do you live in?
In Maryland. Mhm.
Okay, I don't know what the law is in Maryland around, death tax and benefit tax and probate, but in the digital world, imagine an ecosystem where you and your daughter can say, just like you said, I actually want to join the bar association and take this test and pay this fee and raise my hand to actually do certain things in the law system. Or like with GBA, it's another association. But imagine if your daughter and you join this digital world and you could actually take your home, your car, your bicycle, your picture on the wall, and you could tokenize those in different tokens. And you could say, you know what, honey, you're going to get 80% of these, and the YMCA is going to get another 20%. I don't know what, everybody has their own perspective.
Yeah, no, I totally get what you're saying. And basically it's a digital will.
Yeah. So, and it's so much bigger. I mean, a digital will is a really good example to kind of think about it.
Mhm.
But imagine assets, even when you're alive. So let's say you're 86 and you say, you know what, I'm tired of working 3 jobs. And you actually just want to play checkers and do crossword puzzles and knit for the rest of your life, right? So what if you just said, you know what, I've worked hard to pay for this house. Instead of trying to do a reverse mortgage, where really the people that actually are funding it, they make the money. Now, closing costs in and of themselves, $20,000, $30,000 per transaction.
Yeah.
Whereas when you and I first started buying houses, it was like 5,000, 3,000. As a matter of fact, we just buried a gentleman, this gentleman right here in California, wonderful man. He actually bought his first house and only house for $16,500. His deposit was $99, and he had to borrow money from 3 or 4 people to come up with the $99 deposit. But you know what happens when this gentleman passes away? I heard this morning, was it this morning? No, it was yesterday, Sunday night, that one brother and sister are having conflict after he passed away, because when his wife passed away, their mother, the daughter wanted to give her son a truck. And the other son was like, the uncle was like, no, that was mine. Dad gave it to me. And the point that I'm driving at is, in the cryptography world, remember, crypto equals cryptography equals math, which is really you're proving something occurred. But
Yep.
what's gorgeous about it is you can actually send many assets. So I don't know if your listeners or viewers can see, but I'm pulling up a phone and it's actually sees multiple different assets. So you can see lots of assets here.
Yeah.
Imagine if the individual can actually say, I'm going to create a business, and here's the ownership of that business. This business can then have different assets. Maybe it's just got a house in this one. Maybe I'm going to create another one that's got just my vehicles. And what's other, I mean, you come from the legal world, you understand if someone runs into somebody else in a vehicle, they have liability, right? And it could hit them, it could hit a business, it could hit both, it could, but when you have it in a trust, and that trust is specifically just for those assets, and you get an insurance company that says, hey, you know what? We see money here. Or let's say they've paid off a house and we're just going to go through a court process and get a judgments against them, which is also a judgments against their house. So if they want to go sell their house, we're going to get paid one way or the other. See, because where you got to understand it is where there's mystery, there's margin. And insurance companies and health companies and pharma companies, even though they want to really provide peace of mind and betterment for the individual, ultimately what's really happening? The individual is actually being tricked into, and this is just my perspective, so listeners, take it as you will, into a form of slavery. You're becoming a slave of a system that thinks they're going to give you a piece of normality, a piece of comfort. When the wind blows, you're going to be safe. When the cancer flies, you're going to be safe. When the cars bumpity into each other, you're going to be safe. But ultimately, they can't give that peace of mind. Can a check get written? Sure. Can legal claims start flying? Sure. Can lawyers get paid on both sides? Sure. But ultimately, if the last breath of your loved one was in that car or someone else's car, no dollar amount can repay what that individual represented in life.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And so, for instance, and as the first part of we transitioned from the centralized system to the decentralized systems, I personally moved my family of 8. So these 6 little children and my wife and I, we moved to New Zealand because the jurisdiction in New Zealand basically has no software patent law. So you cannot, what's that?
I said, that's very interesting.
Yeah, there's no software patent law by design, but copyright law is very strong. So we actually moved to New Zealand, and in so doing, we understood that in the insurance industry, you can't sue somebody else. If you're driving a car and you run into them walking across the road, or you run into another car and somebody passes away or gets an arm cut off, there's no lawsuits. You cannot sue. I mean, think about that. Coming from an American perspective, that is just morbid, right? Like it's justice is going to have to be had. But what it does is it takes a form of camaraderie and accountability and community, and people start actually driving better. I would promise you, if you looked at the ratios of deaths and accidents per capita, you would see in New Zealand the quality of life is improved because of those numbers. And so what I mean by that is people actually are more inapt to say, slow down, don't be reckless. And one of the other things I think is just, I actually didn't mind it, but you'd be just driving into a city and they just stop you in the road and just breathalyze you right there. Talk about no rights, talk about just straight up. We don't care what your name is, just breathe into this. If you're driving, you breathe, say your name, that's all they do. And then they have a little trailer off to the side. If you're drunk, they basically just pull your car over and put you in the trailer. And people don't complain about it. They don't look at violations of privacy or nothing. Why? Because it's the betterment of society. That's one of the reasons with this whole pandemic, you end up having these colonialized countries, New Zealand, Australia, Canada, where they're literally rolling out these same types of community-based environments where, you know, the healthcare systems are already standardized and centralized. And for them to say everyone's going to get inoculated, that's just how it is, that's a commonplace for everyone to get educated. The point that I'm driving at is, I'm not saying that government is bad.
Right.
But government has a place to serve the individual citizen, not control them. They're not the next mafia. But I can tell you that this pandemic is not just something around a virus. It's much bigger than that. It's about financial reset and digital control. And when they can digitally control us, for instance, in Q1 of this year, a certain sitting president basically said by executive order, money will be programmable. And you can go do your research, but money can be programmable. What does that mean? So first off, it's digital. Second off, you can actually say, let's say we want to issue everybody a welfare or dole check. And if you don't use it in a certain amount of time, you lose it. Or if you want to buy a certain quantity of something, maybe ammunition, you can't do it. Or, and I just threw ammunition out there. Maybe it's 3 watermelons instead of 2, who knows? Or what if you want to go on a trip somewhere and you're in a zip code where you're not authorized to actually use those funds? These are just 3 examples of very simple realities that could be right around the corner. Not just could be, but in other countries, they already are happening.
But I've heard, to play advocate here, I've heard that on the flip side, that's not a bad thing. From the perspective that it, again, from the blockchain use, that it's a way to be able to, yes, control where the funds go, but also to make sure that there's no fraud involved with the use of funds that are supposed to go to certain causes or events or things like that. Because again, sometimes the lack of accountability of where funds have gone means that the funds aren't there, and then people still suffer, and then those funds still have to be caught up or given again. So it can be, there's 2 sides to this. Yes, there might be someone directing it in a way which maybe they shouldn't be, but on the other side, maybe we do need accountability for the proper use of it.
A very, very wise observation and comment. And I understand and agree with where you're coming from. But what I would ask is, what if the individual could actually identify where certain resources were spent? What if the individual could actually say, the house that I worked for, the car that I worked for, the jewelry that I have, maybe it's a wedding ring, I want to be the one that dictates who that goes to when I pass
Well,
away.
that I totally agree. What I'm talking about is if it's government, even though ultimately every fund that comes from a government came from us because, through taxes or whatever. But if the government is funding certain emergency situations or things like that, and trying to make sure that those individuals are getting it and it doesn't get stopped somewhere and misappropriated, that's what I'm thinking about. Not from the individual side of determining what it is that we have, but more from the global government side.
So, and there's really, and this is a very good document that spells out the direct answer to what you're talking about.
Yeah.
So this is the Digital World Declaration. So if you go to digitalworld.earth/declaration, you can see it. And down here, it starts out with this Declaration of Unity for Decentralized Communities. And what it really talks about is it goes through what centralization is.
Yep.
Goes through what currently is happening. It talks about accountability, communications, motion, boundaries, motivation, knowledge, all these different realities. But to use the analogy that you just brought up, all it's saying is, in this digital world, true decentralization will be able to be number one, instead of centralized decentralization. And I'll give you an example. In the last 2.5 years, 4 countries have adopted Bitcoin as their standard currency. So no longer do they use their own version of the peso and this and that. They literally have Bitcoin as a standard. And you know what they figured out was Bitcoin takes an average of 10 minutes to actually transact or to consummate. And so what I mean by that is when we look at a chart like this actually now looks at 14 billion over 24 hours. It looks at the average cost and it looks at the average transfer time. Now, Bitcoin takes over 10 minutes to transfer on average.
Which is a little bit long for a country that needs to do transactions, though.
You got it. And so what do they do? So they say, oh, well, hey, you could still use Bitcoin, but you just layer it on this Lightning Network. And all you got to do to get an account with the Lightning Network is provide your name and your date of birth and some other identifier. Maybe it's an address or maybe it's a phone number. Well, what they're doing is they're centralizing decentralization because they link that to your public key for your Bitcoin wallet. And so you think, I actually have my own Bitcoin because I have my own Bitcoin private phrase. No, you don't. Well, yet technically you do. You control your own Bitcoin, but the transactions are now centrally audited. So your identifier, your name is linked to your public key, and everything that you do can now be totally seen. And so to your point around, let's say I want to donate to a cause. Like I went to lunch today, and for every pizza that's bought, there's a meal that's actually delivered. I looked at the number. It was like 1.4 billion meals have actually been delivered. This place is like, all they do is they care about literally, it was started to be a nonprofit. They went to Malawi, Africa, and they literally named the restaurant after it, the whole 9 yards. And that's how they basically do everything. It's all about giving. So how can you prove that that pizza that was bought actually went to a real meal that actually got into a real tummy of someone that actually needed it? And I actually told my kids, I said, I want you to go around while we're waiting for these pizzas to come out and look at the eyes of the children in the photos and have a little bit more gratitude for the pizzas, the full-blown pizzas that you're getting. Because they don't get pizzas down there. They get this food anyway. It's this mash paste stuff. The point that I'm driving at is, how do you cryptographically know that a well was delivered or a mill was delivered or certain water was pumped out?
Accountability side of it.
How do you drive that? And what's gorgeous around cryptography is, and technology is, that's easy to do. Easy. Yeah. But you don't need a government to control it to do it. And if you allow the government to create the asset and then to control the asset, the individual will be in the biggest slavery that humanity has ever seen.
Let me ask you this question, because as you were talking about, Bitcoin and the Lightning and then, wallets and things like that, I think I know the answer, but I'll ask it anyway. What is your thought about some of these platforms doing KYC, know your customer? Because that in putting your information into the KYC, then they automatically know where you're located. And sometimes that ends up being blocked in terms of which cryptocurrency you can obtain or not, depending upon the laws within your country. So again, that is another form in my mind of centralization, even though it's on a decentralized platform. So what are your thoughts about that?
I believe that KYC, whether it's where you're located or what you spend or how you're taxed, if you're going to choose to spend money in their currency that they created, that you may have been born into, you're in their field, you're in their territory, you're in their rules, in their regulations, if you so choose. Now, but what about a digital world? And I'm going to jump through. This is the current site. So please, read the declaration. If it's something that aligns with you, let's have another conversation around that. But let's jump through literally a use case. And this may be a touchy topic. And we're going through a voting. So there's monthly digital town halls that actually goes through what this digital world will actually do. And one of the big topics is around tax. So let's say you join the digital world, your daughter joins the digital world, you create a business in the digital world or a trust, you put your home into that trust, and then you pass it to her when you pass away. Or maybe, like I said before, 20% is going to go to the YMCA and 80% is going to go to your daughter. Or maybe, there's lots of different use cases, but is there tax on that? Is there tax on your transfer to her? Is there tax on your death? Is there tax on the transfer after you're passed? Is there a death tax? And so imagine that a vote in the digital world says, you know what? You're operating in a new jurisdiction. You're choosing to be a part of the jurisdiction. You're using a currency that's a part of this jurisdiction, cryptographic technology that creates a business in this jurisdiction, a business registry that validates it in this jurisdiction, and you're transacting in digital assets in this jurisdiction, not in a USD type transaction.
Interesting.
So imagine, they can say, hey, but let's say that anything in this wallet may go into systems that are going to go into USD. Maybe it's going from Coinbase or from some credit card or from some. Imagine a system where it says, okay, plug in your keys, and this system can automatically look at certain folks that are out there and provide you, depending on your jurisdiction that you live in, a simple form. And this form could actually provide based upon cryptographic keys, which, by the way, the state of Wyoming has already authorized, and it's federally approved. I was there the very night that it happened with the Attorney General and a bunch of others. But they basically have approved for a public key to actually create a business or a trust or ecosystems like that. So why can't a special purpose entity that is in the digital world also traverse the fiat world or US dollar world and have to file forms in alignment with that? And when you really understand this, we're talking about a scalable process that can literally be duplicated in a brand new jurisdiction or ecosystem that can provide humanity benefits that we can't even fathom today. I mean, think about healthcare and data 5 generations from now, looking back in how we can actually improve health. So for instance, let's say that your joints hurt on a certain temperature or after you eat a certain type of fruit or whatever. You start figuring that out. And what happens if it's not even something that you as an individual even recognize, but over time, certain things, kind of like this little guy here, where you've got a ring that can actually plug in, or you've got a watch that can actually read certain things. Imagine your body communicating with this digital ecosystem, and your health data literally being able to be understood, and not just mind, but it can actually define who you are, how you feel, what you do. But imagine leveraging technology and gathering data points over generations of time, what that could do for future generations. I mean, it's almost unspeakable. So, but there's so much more to this. I mean, the digital world, you know, not just marriages in the digital ecosystem. Like I said, this is already done today, to voting, which we're all familiar with, which tomorrow is a very big, important day. Contacts, imagine contacts that actually are private to you. And so their public key does not go in a central system, and you can literally transact with these individuals, but the transactions are private to you and the individuals. And if you want to report certain things or define certain things or have reputations or even forensics that are built into it, it's all defined. So I'm going to stop blabbing. I hope that a lot of this.
Yeah, no, this is incredible from the depth of it. And in terms of, it covers all areas of how we live and where we can go with this. You know, I know you're showing, for those that are on the audio side, you definitely have to pop over to the video side so you can see the diversity of what Michael is showing. But it really, when you break down every part of our life, each part of our life touches this digital world. And we are in a physical world, but we're also always transversing right now a digital world, you know, because we have our phone, we have our computers. So it's not like we are not located in a digital world. So this is very important for everyone to look at. Last minute takeaways. I think that everyone should definitely take a look at this, but what would you ask people to think about, or what would you like people to take in terms of next steps?
What I would really request you to think about is, what phone and what carrier do you choose to pay for? And is that phone and that carrier providing a benefit to the future of humanity? And what I would urge you to look at hard is the Clear phone, the Freedom phone, or the Armor phone. And you can find them at clear.store is the Clear phone. And this basically is the first decentralized phone in the world. There's 3 different models. And then, you know, you've got the biggest one is the 620. It's actually, this phone competes with any of the Android or Apple phones out there in the world. You may have heard about it from Candace Owens. She talked a lot about the Freedom phone. And there's a lot more to come here, but that's a different conversation. But the Freedom phone is also built on the same technology as the Clear phone, which is a decentralized core to it. And then there's other models I won't get into, but the point that I'm driving at is focus on what you as an individual are actually doing as your on-ramp into this digital world. Because if you're using a digital or decentralized platform like these devices, you're automatically going to leapfrog over a lot of the other folks that are already out there. And so please just make the transition. If you're on Android, it is a very easy transition to a Clear phone or a Freedom phone. If you're coming from Apple, it's going to be a longer journey, but it's really simple. As a matter of fact, for instance, I'm going to pull up my phone here. I'm going to pull up my screen here.
Yeah, I see it.
I'm going to show you all the Clear apps. So these are all decentralized apps, but then I'm going to click over here and show you all my normal Android apps. The ClearOS marketplace has about 150,000 Android-based apps, but there's a server side of it. But what I'm trying to point out is you can literally just do a couple of clicks and say, I actually want to use a certain type of, look at all these different icons just change.
Yep. Yep.
And then notice all these.
Yep.
They're literally, so most folks don't understand it, but the Apple and the Android ecosystem, the apps usually have the same feature or functions. You know, can I get a balance? Can I do a transaction? Can I do a search? You know, most of the features and functions are the same. The difference is, instead of being stored inside of a a centralized system like with Apple and Google, it's literally taking the data and the encryption keys, the 12 words, and it uses derived keys to then tie it to decentralized storage. And that is really what the most important piece of this digital world is all about. It's how can decentralization be layered in and truly give the keys to the individual? And it goes back to what you were saying before, because it's so very valid.
it's important to learn from technology and use technology, but not let it control us. It already is controlling a ton of what we're doing, what we see, what we hear, even what we feel. There's so much to it because it's been designed that way. But it's not a matter of let's be afraid of it. What it's a matter of is how can it be intelligently integrated for the betterment of humanity so that the individual, they can validate who they are. They can store what they want, how they want. I mean, just this conversation alone, we're literally leveraging it on Zoom, which is actually owned by China, which is a different conversation. I'm not saying China's bad at all, but imagine a system like this. Like if you literally created your own channel, so you come in, let's say you created a personal room, this will go up to like 1,000 people. The other one will go up to like 16,000. So let's say you created your own room, you could literally have your replacement. For instance, let's jump into this meeting here. So you can see all the people that I've talked to just earlier today, and if there was a recording or not, or a transcription or not, and you can pull it down. But this is data that I actually individually own. Does that make sense?
Total sense, total sense. And as a person who believes that media should be for education and for everyone, I'll definitely be looking at, the digital world platform so I can see how I can transact over and that type of thing. So I definitely believe in what you're saying, both in terms of how information is stored, where it's stored and who owns it, and then what we do with it. Because again, I'm as an educator in the elementary school and also, navigating over to the adult education side, we all have a personal responsibility, I believe, to help each generation understand the depth of the potential of what they can be and who they are as individuals. So I definitely appreciate what you created and who you're working with, the community. And for everyone who's listening, all the contact information will be in the blog below. Michael, why don't you go ahead and say one more time the platforms, the link, so that way people can navigate over there. If they aren't, if they have paper and pen, they can go right over there now.
So digitalworld.earth. And I'd highly recommend looking at the declaration, which is just /declaration, or just click on it. And I'm going to drop all of these inside of this so you'll have them as well. If you want to learn about the Clear companies behind it, you can go to clear.co.com. If you want to learn about the Clear phone, just go to clear.store. There's really a lot here, but the best way to do it is to just probably watch videos. There's so many, there's like, tons and tons of videos, but that's really a good place to kind of understand. But ultimately, I would say it's already innately in us as individuals to understand, we're born as individuals. Our mother was an individual and so forth. And we understand that it's a natural thing to not be controlled. Now, your daughter that's 24, right?
26, yeah.
You were 20.
Yeah, no, she's for her, every year is important.
She may have a mindset. Yeah, my son, had a birthday yesterday. I've got 5 boys and a girl, and he says, "I'm 16 again, Dad. I don't want to turn 17." It's like, well, that's usually the opposite. At that age, you want to roll. But the point is 26 years old, your daughter's probably thinking, and that may be on the higher end, usually around 24 to 22. It's really commonplace to say, you know what? I don't care if they know where I go. I don't care if they know how fast I'm going. I don't care if they know what I eat. I don't care if they know what I search. I don't care if they know what I think. It doesn't matter. They just don't care.
Yeah.
But there will be a time, and I would say the time is actually already here, where when you want to go buy an ice cream or a hot dog at a ballpark, you will do it through an app. You will not do it with cash. And when you walk up to a window and just say, "Hey, can I have an ice cream cone?"
Right.
They will profile every part of your life. And it's not just to control you. It's bigger than that. And the real reality that I think that we're living in this year, 2022, is not a matter of being full of fear because systems have been taken over or because media is saying things that just is either scary or doesn't feel right, or our hearts are full of fear. It's not that. We should have the utmost gratitude for the time and dispensation that we get to live in. We literally, like you and I, when we were born, that we were lucky to find a typewriter, let alone a computer, or an internet connection or a cell phone. They just didn't exist. I
They did
literally
not
learned how to
exist.
type on
Me
the
too.
typewriters that
Me
went
too.
up, like bing, bing, like
Yeah.
it came up.
And the little whiteout.
I thought it was cool when you could push the button and the erase thing would pop that thing up. It was like, I didn't even have one of those. But the point that I'm trying to drive at is we actually got to start our lives when the digital world wasn't there. But Jackie, my, and your listeners, our responsibility is to make sure that the future generations have at least a springboard to jump off of, where they're not jumping into a hot kettle of water, just like the froggy that just got boiled and they didn't have a choice. We got to leave them with a choice. We must. And so that would be the biggest message: is get involved, understand what decentralization, get a decentralized phone, start using them. There's people out there that'll help you 24/7. Like literally, the Clear phone comes with 24/7 support. No matter what you have, they can remote control it, talk to you, all of it. And it's all about your privacy and your security. And today, you're in my generation, get this, because the profiling, I've been all around the world 3 times. And one of the weirdest countries, it wasn't even China. It was actually Singapore. It was like, there are 15 cameras on this light, on this stoplight, 15 cameras going every way. And it's like, why do they need them all? Oh, they're profiling us. Well, how can they tell the difference between that face and that face? And when you really start understanding that there truly is secret combinations and there truly is a game plan behind this, it really, for me, I don't feel like work at all. But the sad thing is, I feel like we've been at war for a long time. It's not just the last couple months or quarters or years. It's bigger than that. And it's good versus evil, because it's the evil plan to take over, to control, to dictate, to mandate. And if you don't do well, these are the consequences. But I guess what I'm trying to say is, we are here not to have fear. And I would even say not to even, faith is all the way on the other side of that spectrum. It may even be crazy and too difficult to ask for people to even have faith, especially during today. But we can be grateful for the time that we're in, and we can work our way to a hopeful future. And that would be the message, is to just have hope, to be a part of the solution, to stop paying for phones that you don't even own. You don't even own your Apple phone. When you really read the user license, you don't even own the phone, the hardware, let alone the data. So please choose to free yourself and to free humanity and to free future generations. If not for yourself, for your kids or for your neighbors' kids or for your nephews, or we're all one family in one way or another. So let's just care,
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And that actually ties into the message that I'll share when we finally end. But I do agree with you on so many levels. Everyone needs to take action. You can't be apathetic. You have to find something that you believe in and then take action towards it. Everyone can make a difference in a little bit within your own family, within your own community. And I know that's been a driving force in my own personal life in terms of service, both in so many levels. My career has navigated so many strange turns, but it's all the constant thread is always serving and helping and trying to make a change and open up people's eyes and ears to having an open heart to help each other. Because again, we are all interconnected. And that's one of the reasons why I resonated with the blockchain community and the decentralized community, because it's allowing individuals to be individuals and to be true to themselves, even though it's scary to be true to yourself, because that means you have to take responsibility. And you also have to think, who am I and what am I doing here and how am I making a difference? And you have to recognize that every action has a reaction, and that if you don't think about that, you have to, because you just can't go blindly through life. You actually have to think about the person who's next to you, and making that considerate difference. So,
There's an ecosystem that has a new statue that's the same size of the Statue of Liberty, and it's called the Statue of Responsibility.
mm,
And I really believe that that's what it comes down to, is us as individuals being accountable, but us as a culture being responsible.
yeah.
And, we don't need to just be fearful that these secret combinations, which by the way, they are very, very real. It's not just the World Economic Forum and United Nations and World International Monetary Fund, that we're just talking about what we think they're doing. I've been to these places personally, not third party, not through an ad or an article or through a video. I've personally been to Davos at the World Economic Forum. I'm telling you, these things are absolutely 100% secret combinations that have a solid plan. Are they executing it perfectly? No. Is it very strategic and planned? Yes. Do they have unlimited amount of resources? Yes. They're creating currency.
Mhm.
They're creating currency. They, but here's the net. We all have time. Time is the biggest gift. It's not money. We have relationships, we have connections, we have time. And if we just intelligently organize ourselves and feverishly work, we've got to serve, we've got to build, we've got to create. Hopefully what you see with the Clear companies that are focused on decentralization, that enable this digital world, is something that people can actually act on and say, you know what? I'll choose to be a part of that digital world. Maybe I think I didn't choose to what country I get to wear a citizenship of, or what state I get to live in. I really believe that we all have choice. We massively do. But in this digital world, it's a new type of entity that we can all self-select to be a part of. And I'm not saying it's life or death, but it's pretty dang close.
So on that note, I want to thank you for being on, Michael. I also want to, as I mentioned at the end of all my podcasts and talks, be kind to yourself, be kind to others. We are all interconnected and we're all part of one world, and that includes the physical as well as the digital world. So thank you so much for being on, and we will talk soon. Thank you so much.
Much love, Jackie.